how would you rate your ability to make good decisions?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me decisions. That's about 110%. Making good decisions, maybe 80%. I've made wrong decisions. There's no doubt about that. But I'll tell you what, when you make a wrong decision, turn it into a learning point.
Yes,
Turn it into something positive.
Very good.
I'm not the kind of person who goes through life saying, I have no regrets. I've got plenty of regrets, but I've turned them all into learning points. So, yep, when you make a bad decision, turn it into a learning point.
Very good. Very wise. Now, that's why we got him here, because he has a lot of wisdom to be able to share with us. So thank you, Dr. Rod. Well, let's get into our first topic. I think I'm actually quite excited to talk about Daniel Ricciardo again, because I actually think it was our first ever podcast that we spoke about Daniel Ricciardo. I'm pretty sure, if not, it was within the first couple. So, we spoke about his saga, almost a year ago. Actually, it probably would be our first one. Almost a year ago, the saga of Daniel Ricciardo losing his seat and being like, it was all this drama, right? So he went and sat on the sideline, and was a reserve driver for Red Bull, and now he's now found himself back in the F1 after 6 months off, after having a nice break, so to speak. He's now back with AlphaTauri, which is Red Bull's sister kind of recruitment kind of recruiter training, kind of their secondary kind of training team. But he's back with them because they had to oust one of their drivers, and so there's actually a number of things within this story that I want to talk about when it comes to decisions. But I want to first, let's talk about his first race back in Hungary, right? So I don't know if you watch F1. My brother-in-law's really gotten me into F1, and I love cars. So and also it's Daniel Ricciardo. He's an Aussie, so it's great to be able to support an Aussie. But Daniel Ricciardo got into an accident, was in 13th, started at 13th, got into an accident or got shunted from behind in the first corner, went back to 18th position, and then just found himself unable to be able to get into clean air because that track, the Hungarian ring, is notorious for not being able to pass and everything like that. And so it was not good for him. So he made the decision. Well, he actually challenged the AlphaTauri team to make the decision for him to do an early pit off the hard tires, then go into this super, super long stint on the medium tires, which actually then allowed him to make his way from 18th back up to 13th, where he finished the race there, which may seem like not that amazing. Oh, 13th, so what? Well, it's his first race back. He did get shunted back to 18th. The AlphaTauri car is not known for its speed. He did do better than his teammate, so that's obviously a good thing. But just because of his strategy, it allowed him to be able to stay out when everyone else was coming in, gave him some clean air, allowed him to make those passes, and put him in a position where he had, let's call it a successful Grand Prix. And so sometimes we as leaders need to make that tough decision. We may have had a hit from behind. We may have been pushed right back. We may have had an absolute disaster happen to us. And we have to make some tough decisions, some risky decisions in that process. But with the right decisions, it can really propel us forward. And so, Dr. Rod, I want to kind of talk about this as like, how do we, first of all, we as leaders are constantly being faced with setbacks, right? Things that are happening that are out of our control, but unfortunately affect us, affect our business, affect our family, affect our ministry, whatever it is. How do we, I suppose, first of all, how do we pull our socks up or whatever, pull ourselves together in that moment I mean, like he's Daniel Ricciardo's. He's in a racing car. He's going at a couple of 100 kilometers an hour, being able to make tough decisions, even in that moment, because he couldn't stop. It's not like he needs to stop, regroup. Let's do another strategy. Like let's try to figure this out. Sometimes we as leaders just have to just keep running hard and make decisions on the fly. How do we do that?
Well, that's a very good question. And it's a question which has been asked many, many times indeed. And of course, in the heat of a race, such as this, you cannot, as you suggest, you can't sit around a table and have a strategy meeting. You can never do that in a crisis. You can never do that when your circumstances are changing very, very rapidly, as they are in a car race, as they are in any kind of crisis for a business or any other kind of organisation.
Yeah,
I think the key is to look forward.
That's good.
So for him, there was a decision. He made a decision about changing tyres. Now, there were risks associated with that, but there wasn't really a lot of point in sitting down and going into a lengthy analysis of the accident.
Yes.
That's something you would do after the race. Look back, is there anything we can learn from that? But at the moment he made the decision to change tyres, that wasn't the time to ask questions about, well, what do we learn about our strategy from that accident? How do we avoid another accident next time? That's not the place to take time to make any decisions about those kinds of strategic implications. You've got to look forward. So he did the right thing by looking forward to the rest of the race. And he took a calculated risk, of course, but he's an expert. He's a driver. He's been in many races before. And for him, it paid off in the sense that he clawed back those 5 places.
And I think the thing we need to also remember is it's not like it was a guess. Like obviously before the race, they've done all their calculations. They know the maximum running time per tire, and they already know how long stints can be, and they've already come in pre-calculated with all different scenarios. And I think that's I suppose that's I would say that's something that does. I would say is part of my kind of skill set and natural ability is I go into situations and this it's actually my downfall a little bit as well is I do overthink. And so I overcalculate. I'll sit up at night and I will think through every possible scenario. And so that's a little bit of a challenge sometimes. But it's also an advantage because some people think, oh, being able to think on your feet is amazing. Yeah, that thinking on your feet is one part of it, but also being prepared is the other. You look at these sports people, and a lot of people that are elite, they do what they call imaginative play, right? Where they actually go through different scenarios in their mind. They'll sit there, they'll be there without even a ball in their hand or whatever, and they'll be pretending like if a person goes there, I'll go this way or whatever. They have imaginative play where they already go through that stuff. And that's kind of what I do is I'm able to make very, very quick decisions. Actually, this is a point of contention with my wife sometimes that we have an argument that I'll make a decision in a moment. And I'm like, but I didn't make that decision in a moment. I've actually been considering that decision and all different variables for weeks, months, whatever it is, that when it came time, I was able to make that decision very quickly. So how do we, I suppose a bit of a therapy session for me here. That's really good to be a critical thinker, right? Analytical thinker. We say, don't be critical, be analytical. It's really good to be an analytical thinker and to think through scenarios beforehand so we can be prepared. How do we avoid, I suppose, going crazy? Because I do sometimes. I think myself to worry, sometimes, I worry about circumstances that are never going to happen. How do we find that balance between being able to think things through and not allowing it to get to a space of worry?
Look, I think part of it is your own personal style or your personality. Some of us are more prone, I suppose, to thinking through scenarios and staying awake at night. I do a little bit of that,
Mhm.
probably not as much as I used to because I'm busier than I ever was. But look, I think what we have to take particular care of when we do have that approach is that we've got to recognize that the people around us probably haven't done the same thing. So that's where communication comes in. So it's all very well for a leader to practice scenarios. As you say, well, I go through all of that at night in bed. In terms of your spouse, well, she's probably asleep. In terms of people, say in a board or in a workplace, well, they're not with you. So you've processed everything.
Yes.
And look, I do this. I've got everything processed before I go to a meeting. I know what my responses are going to be. Not only that, I know why. But the trouble is, other people haven't been along on that journey with you.
Yeah.
So that's where communication becomes paramount. And
Yeah. That's actually. I'll jump on that.
Yeah,
That's really good, because one thing when I was when I was focused on teaching people to be professional speakers and to communicate properly, I used to always say to them is, you've had a revelation, you've had a personal revelation about whatever it is that you're talking about. Now, that revelation was made up of a bunch of different experiences along the way that you had that kind of helped you form, I suppose, your worldview around this thing. So if you want people to have the same revelation, then you need to take them on that same, I suppose, emotional journey that you have, for them to be able to for them to be able to come to that same same revelation, hopefully in a shorter period of time.
yeah. Look, I remember some years ago. I'm quite open about this. I did need some help from a psychologist. I got into a situation where I was pretty stressed.
Mm.
And I wasn't too happy about life. So I went to my doctor and he put me onto a psychologist and we went through a series of sessions. Oh, I think it lasted for just over a year. But one of the things he said to me is, you do exactly what you were saying you do, Craig.
Mm.
You go through all this stuff. You look at the costs and the benefits, the rights and the wrongs, all the possibilities. And by the time you get to have a conversation with somebody, you know what your conclusion is.
Mm.
The trouble is no one else has been on that journey. And one of the pieces of advice that he gave me was, well, just hold back in a meeting. You might well know what your solution is or what your position is. Let others speak first. Because he said the problem with you bringing your conclusion or your decision to the table up front early on in a discussion is that it leaves you for the rest of the interaction having to defend your position. That stresses you. And if that's the way you behave in your marriage, in your workplace, as a chair of a board or a director, man, you're going to have a lot of stress in your life. So I've learned that there's nothing wrong with going through all the scenarios and knowing why it is you've come to a particular position. But sometimes it's a good idea to let other people speak first and to hear them out before you actually lay your cards on the table. So I would have
That's
to
really good.
say, you know what, I as a Christian, I believed that integrity demanded that I put my cards on the table early on. But I've come to have a different perspective now, that as a Christian or as a responsible person of any kind, Christian or not, yeah, you do need to think through your position on anything very carefully. But there's also great advantage in listening to others. And of course, Proverbs tells us there is wisdom in the counsel of many, and you just might find that you come to a different conclusion after listening to other people. But yeah, you've really put your finger on an issue which happens in boardrooms as well as bedrooms.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a great thing. Is when I go into those conversations, especially like my wife, like that's probably the easiest example of the most rawest and closest to home, is and and admittedly, she doesn't like this tactic because she turns around and goes, "You're just coaching me." But I usually, in that moment, even though I've come to a conclusion, what I do is I go into the conversation by going, "I'm just going to ask questions." So you know how
Right,
you
yes,
just said,
yeah.
like, well, you don't want to go in and then be constantly defending yourself. Well, I'll go in and ask questions. Now, they will be kind of leading questions, but more not because I'm trying to lead them to a particular outcome. There'll be a leading questions because I know what solution, where I want to go. I want to make sure that the answers that they have will either confirm or discredit, what I'm the decision I'm making. So that is a frustrating thing that I do find, is that I will usually go into those situations and just ask questions, but my wife doesn't have any of it. she doesn't. She goes, "Stop coaching me." I'm like, I'm not. I'm just trying to find out what your point of view is, so that I can make sure that our decisions are matched. Now, there was actually another part of this whole situation that I want to kind of talk about with the decision making, and it actually comes down to about Daniel Ricciardo actually being a part of Red Bull and his long-term vision to be a part of Red Bull. They're talking about, and I'll get this in full mode for you. So there was this article, by the race, actually a video on YouTube. All links are down below if you want those. About Perez is the secondary, but they're not meant to be secondary, but he is a secondary driver in Red Bull, below Max Verstappen. And obviously Daniel Ricciardo is trying to gun for his seat. And so there's the leadership. Daniel Ricciardo said he never actually wanted to be in a lower pace car. That was his whole thing, right? And so the fact that he is actually now down in one of those lower paced cars, there was obviously some negotiations going by of like, well, this has to be my step into the main team or whatever, like, whatever the discussions were. But there's a lot of leadership challenges and decisions that are being made around Daniel Ricciardo right now, where he was a reserve driver. Now he's in AlphaTauri, which is obviously not where he wants to be. He's a better driver than that team. He's gunning for Perez's seat now. How do you as a leader make that decision? Because you're now managing what Daniel Ricciardo wants, but what also Perez wants. You're positioning this. Like, how do you make that decision that you're trying to make something best for the team and the overall, and trying to manage the decision for like individual, let's call them superstars, right? Like, because you may have in your business, in your ministry or whatever, you may actually have a bunch of different superstar team members that you're trying to help keep happy, but also get the best outcome for the business. How do you make those decisions in those moments?
Well, first thing I think is to understand that sometimes it's impossible because of the nature of the game that you happen to be in. And I think too that sport is not 100% analogous with business either.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to remember though is that we want heroic teams, not teams of heroes.
Ooh, I like that one.
Okay,
Say that again for me.
We want heroic teams, but not teams of heroes.
I love that.
Now, look, again, in racing cars, it's a little bit different too, because you've got one driver at a time in a car, and you want these drivers to be the very, very best. So, in sports in particular, rules of the game matter, but also where there's a team involved. Really, from a decision-making point of view, it's got to be the team that will provide the best outcome overall, because it's a team outcome that you're driving at. It's a bit different if we're talking, say, about golf, but I guess motor racing sits somewhere in between, say, golf and one of the football codes, where you've got teams playing on a field and there's whatever number, depending on the rules of the game, they're all on together. In motor racing, you've got a single driver at a time in a vehicle. So, and it's not an industry that I'm thoroughly familiar with either. But you need to balance that. You do need to understand there's going to be significant competition among the individual drivers to get the best seat, right? Partly because their own career and their financial compensation and so on depends upon it. And also they're not going to get anywhere in racing if they don't have a pretty sizable ego to start with.
Yes.
So that's part of it. But then you've got the overall sort of team overlay. So it's a lot easier to talk about something which is a genuine team sport, so to speak, like one of the football codes, for example, or a women's sporting team, be that netball or women's rugby or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
I think motor racing is somewhere in between, which makes the decisions really, really complex. I don't know whether I've helped very much, but I think it is important that you've got to understand the rules of the game, the role of the team, and decisions must be made with a focus on the team, but not just the outcomes in the immediate term, but also in the medium and longer terms as well. So what do you do if you make a decision and you lose a good person from your team to a competitor? It's a difficult juggling act, and you're not always going to get it right. But look, when you make a mistake, learn from that mistake, use it as a learning point, and then move on and focus decision making on what's going to be good for the future.
Yeah, I think with what you're talking about is it comes down to purpose, right? You need to still, when you say the rules of the game. Okay, what's the rules of the game? Well, let's talk about our everyday businesses. It's really focused on trying to make sure that we understand what is the purpose, the outcome of this project, but also our ultimate outcome or our ultimate purpose as an organization. We talk about this in our free leadership development program. Yes, link down in description, shameless plug. But we have a free leadership development program which actually talks you through the basis of trying to find the balance between what I want to achieve, or what's my purpose, what's the purpose of the organization or the project or the outcome that we're driving towards, but also what's the purpose of the people we're leading. We need to actually find that balance, and when that's out of balance, that's when we just need to make that tough decision to say it's not working, or not, because if everyone's purposes are aligned, then great. That's where we get a great symbiotic relationship. And as Dr. Rob was saying, with teams, it's easier to see with whole teams when players are gelling together on a field or on a court all at the same time. It's very obvious that they're all getting along. But when we're talking teams, like something like F1, it's a little bit disconjointed. But the teams still need to be able to gel together, because they're all driving towards, a common goal or a common outcome. So, as Dr. Rob was saying, I think one of the goals there, one of the main outcomes, or the biggest lesson we can learn from this complexity that's happening in Daniel Ricciardo's career is number one, like we said before, when we're making decisions, make sure we're prepared. Make sure we think things through. Make sure we're very analytical and be prepared for those things. But make sure when we're prepared, don't just come in and try to bulldoze everyone with our ideas. Allow other people to contribute their ideas as well before coming to our conclusion. But also at the end is know what our outcome is. Know what our outcome is. Make sure it's aligned with everyone's purposes are aligned on the team so we can have a better outcome. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership Podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.